There was no argument, and raised voices, and slammed doors. Just a quiet moment, so ordinary that anyone else would have missed it. But I didn't. I remember the exact day, because the house was unusually calm. The kind of calm that doesn't feel peaceful, it feels distant. Like sound exists, but warmth doesn't. I was standing in the kitchen, rinsing a teacup slowly, watching the water swirl as if it had somewhere important to be. The sunlight filtered through the window, touching the counter in thin, golden lines. It used to be my favorite time of day. Mornings were once full of purpose. Before Sanaa came into our lives, mornings meant preparing Saad's breakfast, reminding him to take his files, asking him if he slept well. He used to sit at the table, half awake, smiling in that quiet way he always had since childhood. "Mom, you worry too much," he would say. And I would always reply, "And you rely on me too much." We both laughed back then. But that morning, he didn't sit at the table. I heard soft laughter coming from the living room. Sanaa's voice, light and effortless. Saad's voice followed, softer than usual, gentler, almost careful. I didn't interrupt. Not because I wasn't welcome, but because something inside me had started asking a question I wasn't ready to hear the answer to. Do they need me right now? Or am I just used to being needed? I placed the teacup on the rack and wiped my hands slowly on a towel, taking a breath longer than necessary. Then I stepped toward the living room. They were sitting close together on the couch, looking at something on Saad's phone. Sanaa leaned slightly toward him, smiling in a way that felt natural, the way a wife should smile at her husband. There was nothing wrong with the scene. Nothing inappropriate, nothing disrespectful, nothing cruel. And yet, there was no space for me in it. Not physically, emotionally. "Mom, good morning," Saad said when he finally noticed me standing near the doorway. He didn't sound distant. He didn't sound cold. He sounded normal. And that was what hurt the most. Because nothing had changed loudly. Everything had changed quietly. "Good morning, son," I replied, forcing a soft smile. Sanaa looked up and smiled politely.
"Good morning, Mom."
Polite. Always respectful. Always well-mannered, always kind. She never disrespected me. And that is why it took me so long to understand what I was feeling. It wasn't disrespect. It was displacement. A very silent one. "I made tea," I said gently. "Oh, you didn't have to, Mom," Sanaa replied quickly. "I was going to make some for us." For us. Not intentionally excluding me, just naturally including each other first. Saad nodded. "We already ordered coffee. It'll be here in a few minutes." I stood there for a second, holding words that suddenly had no place to land. The tea I made cooled behind me in the kitchen. No one had rejected it, but no one needed it either. And that was the first moment a strange realization touched my heart. I was still loved, but I was no longer central. I went back to the kitchen quietly and poured the tea into my cup instead. The steam rose slowly, fading into the air just like the role I had played for years. I sat alone at the small table near the window. And for the first time in many years, I drank my tea without anyone calling my name. Not "Mom, where is my file?" Not "Mom, have you eaten?" Not "Mom, can you help me with this?" Just silence. Heavy, but polite silence. That day continued like any other. Sanaa cooked lunch. Saad worked from his laptop. The television played softly in the background.
And I watched.
Not in suspicion, not in jealousy, but in observation. I noticed how naturally they moved around each other. How decisions were made in quiet glances. How conversations happened in low voices that didn't require my presence. It was not exclusion. It was independence. And I should have felt proud. Instead, I felt unnecessary. Around afternoon, Sanaa entered the kitchen while I was folding some dish towels. "Mom, you should rest more," she said gently. "You do too much." Her tone was soft, respectful,
Caring even.
but her words carried something deeper. You do too much. Not, "We need you," not, "We can't manage without you." Just, "You do too much." "I'm used to it," I replied with a small smile. She hesitated for a second. "You don't have to be used to it anymore." That sentence stayed with me longer than she probably intended, because it wasn't harsh. It was practical. And practicality, I learned that day, can sometimes feel colder than cruelty. Later in the evening, Saad and Sanaa planned to go out for dinner. "Mom, you should come with us," Saad said casually. It sounded like an invitation, but it felt like a formality. Not because he didn't mean it, but because I heard the pause before he said it, the kind pause, the considerate pause. The pause of someone remembering, not someone naturally including. "You both go," I replied calmly. "I'm a little tired today." And that was the first time I chose distance. Not out of anger, not out of hurt, but out of dignity.
They didn't insist. They didn't argue.
They simply accepted. And that acceptance told me more than words ever could. After they left, the house became very quiet. I walked into Saad's room slowly. It looked different now. Not wrong, not uncomfortable, just not mine anymore. His wardrobe had Sanaa's clothes, the bedside table had her books. The room carried a new rhythm, one that didn't revolve around a mother's presence. I touched the edge of the study table where he once did his homework as a boy. Years ago, he used to call me for the smallest things. "Mom, where's my pen? Mom, I can't find my notebook. Mom, sit with me while I study." Now, he found everything on his own. Or Sanaa helped him. And that is how life is supposed to be. I knew that. I truly did. But knowing something with the mind is very different from accepting it with the heart. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't complain. I didn't even feel anger. What I felt was quieter than all of those emotions. I felt clarity. Not the painful kind. The mature kind. The kind that whispers instead of shouts. Sitting on my bed, I finally admitted something to myself that I had been avoiding for weeks. No one was disrespecting me. They were simply building their own life. And I was still standing in the center of a chapter that had already turned its page. That realization didn't break me. It steadied me. Because disrespect demands confrontation. But quiet displacement requires wisdom. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. Not to cook, not to organize, not to ask anyone what they needed, but to sit with myself. For the first time in years, I asked a question that had nothing to do with my son, my home, or my responsibilities. I asked, "What do I need now?" The answer did not come immediately, but a decision began forming. A gentle one, a dignified one, a silent one. I would not beg for relevance, that I would not force my presence into moments that were no longer naturally mine, and most importantly, I would not stay in spaces where my effort slowly turned into quiet invisibility. Not because they were unkind, but because I respected myself enough to recognize emotional shifts before they turned into emotional neglect. That day, I stopped inserting myself into their routines. If they laughed in the living room, I didn't interrupt. If they planned something, I didn't hover. If they handled things together, I didn't quietly take over. And something surprising happened. No one stopped me. No one noticed immediately. Not because they didn't love me, but because my constant presence had always been so natural that my quiet step back felt normal too. That was the moment I truly understood. Being loved does not always mean being needed. And being needed is not the same as being respected. So that day, without any announcement, without any drama, without any confrontation, I made my first quiet choice. I chose distance, not out of hurt, but out of self-respect. Because I realized something deeply important. Disrespect doesn't always arrive as harsh words. Sometimes, it arrives as gradual emotional irrelevance. And I refused to wait for the day when my presence would feel like an obligation instead of comfort. So I stepped back first. Gently, silently, dignified. Not leaving the family. Just leaving the version of myself that disappeared just to remain needed. And that was the first day I chose distance instead of waiting for disrespect to slowly find me. The second week after my quiet decision did not begin with anything dramatic. No cold behavior, and harsh words, and visible change in how Saad or Sanaa spoke to me. And yet, everything felt different. Because this time, the change was inside me. I woke up before far as I always did, But instead of heading straight to the kitchen out of habit, I paused at my bedroom door. For years, my mornings began with movement, preparing breakfast, checking the house, making sure everyone's day started smoothly. That morning, I stood still, listening. The house was peaceful, not empty, not tense, just self-sufficient. I walked slowly to the kitchen and made tea only for myself. It felt strange, not sad, not wrong, just unfamiliar. The kettle whistled softly, and for the first time in decades, I was not thinking about who else needed tea, who preferred less sugar, or who would be running late. I poured one cup, placed it on the table, and sat down. The chair across from me remained empty, but it did not feel lonely the way it would have before. It felt honest. A few minutes later, I heard footsteps. Sana entered the kitchen first, tying her hair back, slightly surprised to see me already seated. "Mom, you woke up so early," she said gently. "I always do," I replied with a soft smile. She glanced at the counter. "You didn't make breakfast?" Her tone was not accusing. It was simply observant. And that small observation told me something important. My routine had become expected, not requested. "I thought you might want to cook something you like today," I said calmly. She paused for a moment, then nodded. "Oh, okay. I'll make omelets." Just like that, the kitchen shifted. Not awkward, not uncomfortable, just different. She moved around confidently, opening cabinets, taking out ingredients, working naturally in a space that once revolved entirely around me. And I let her, not because I was hurt, but because I was learning. Saad came in a few minutes later, still half asleep, scrolling through his phone. "Good morning, Mom," he said automatically. "Good morning, son." He looked at the stove. "You didn't cook today?" Again, not complaint, just surprise. "I wanted to rest a little," I answered. He nodded easily. "That's good. You should rest more." Then he sat beside Sana while she cooked, talking to her about something work-related. Their conversation flowed naturally, comfortable, uninterrupted, complete. I sipped my tea quietly. And for the first time, I did not try to fill the pauses, that I did not ask extra questions, that I did not insert myself into their rhythm. I simply observed what their life looked like without my constant involvement. It was stable. It was functional. It was happy. And that realization brought me a strange kind of peace mixed with a very gentle ache. Not the ache of rejection, but the ache of transition. Later that day, Sana reorganized the pantry. Usually, that was something I handled myself. I knew exactly where everything belonged, which jar held which spice, and how the shelves stayed neat for years. This time, she didn't ask. She just did it. And I watched from the doorway for a moment before quietly turning away. Not because I was offended, but because I understood something deeper. When someone begins to take responsibility naturally, it is not disrespect. It is growth. In the afternoon, Saad called out from the living room, "Mom, where is my blue file?" My heart responded before my mind could. For years, that question had been my cue to stand up immediately, search the house, and place the file directly into his hands. But this time, I stayed seated. "It should be in your study drawer," I replied gently. There was a short silence. Then I heard the drawer open. Papers shuffled. A few seconds later, he said, "Oh, yes. Found it." And that was it. Such a small moment. So ordinary. So insignificant to anyone else. But to me, it felt like a quiet turning point. He didn't need me to find it anymore. He could manage. And instead of feeling replaced, I chose to feel relieved. That evening, they planned another dinner outside. This time, Saad didn't immediately say, "Mom, you should come." Instead, he said, "Mom, we're going out for dinner. Do you need anything from outside? Need anything? Not. Come with us." I smiled softly.
"No, son."
"Enjoy your evening." He nodded, completely at ease. Sana added warmly, "We'll bring dessert for you."
Kind.
Respectful. Considerate. But the invitation had quietly disappeared, and I did not ask for it. After they left, I walked through the house, slowly. The living room lights were dim. Their laughter, which usually filled the space, was absent. The silence now felt wider, but not heavier. I sat on the sofa and looked around. This house had once depended on my presence for its emotional balance. Every meal, every schedule, every small detail carried my involvement. Now, the house functioned even in my stillness. And instead of feeling useless, I began to understand something powerful. My worth was never meant to be measured by how indispensable I was. It was meant to be measured by how gracefully I could step back when the time came. That night, Sana called me from the restaurant. "Mom, do you want chocolate cake or cheesecake?" Her voice was cheerful. I smiled into the phone. "Anything you like, son." She laughed softly. "Then chocolate cake." The call ended, and I stared at the phone for a few seconds. She cared. Saad cared. But their care no longer required my presence in every moment. And that was not cruelty. That was life evolving. Days passed in this quiet pattern. I stopped reminding them about small things, stopped hovering in conversations, stopped anticipating needs that were never expressed. And slowly I noticed something unexpected. There was no conflict, no tension, no emotional explosions, just balance. One afternoon, Sana entered my room with folded laundry. "Mom, you've been resting more lately," she said gently. "Yes," I replied. She hesitated before speaking again. "Are you feeling okay?" That question carried concern, real concern, and it warmed my heart more than constant dependence ever had. "I'm fine, son," I said softly, "just learning to slow down." She sat beside me for a moment. "You've done so much for this house for years. It's our turn now." Our turn. Not, "We don't need you." Not, "Stay out of the way." Just, our turn. And in that moment, something inside me softened completely. Because I realized my fear had never been about disrespect. It had been about becoming invisible. But I was not invisible. I was simply transitioning from being the center to being a presence. That evening, Saad sat beside me for a few minutes, something he hadn't done quietly in a long time. "Mom," he said, "you seem different these days." "Different how?" I asked calmly. He thought for a moment. "Quieter. But peaceful." Peaceful. That word stayed in the air like a gentle truth. "I'm just giving you both space," I replied. He frowned slightly. "You never needed to do that." I looked at him with a soft smile, the same way I used to when he was a child who didn't yet understand the weight of adulthood. "Space is not distance, son," I said gently. "Sometimes it is respect." He didn't argue. He didn't fully understand either. But he nodded slowly. And that was enough. That night, as I lay in bed, I reflected on the past 2 weeks. No one had disrespected me, and no one had pushed me away, and no one had spoken harshly. And yet, I had still chosen distance.
Why?
Because I finally understood a truth that many mothers realize too late. If you wait for obvious disrespect, you may already be emotionally exhausted by the time it arrives. But if you recognize quiet shifts early, you can step back with dignity instead of pain. I was not withdrawing from love. I was redefining my place within it, not as the woman who must do everything to feel valued, but as the mother who knows when to gently loosen her grip without letting go of her heart. And that night, with a calm I hadn't felt in years, I whispered to myself in the silence of my room. I am still loved, I am still respected, but I no longer need to prove my place by being constantly needed. And for the first time since their marriage, the silence in the house did not teach me loneliness. It taught me my place. A place of dignity, a place of quiet strength, a place where distance was not rejection, but self-respect in its most graceful form. There was a time when I believed silence in a home meant something was wrong. If the house became too quiet, I would turn on the television. If conversations paused, I would ask questions. If moments felt empty, I would fill them with effort. For years, I thought love meant constant presence. Constant doing, constant giving, constant showing up. But by the third week of my quiet distance, I began to understand something that changed me deeply. Not every silence needs to be filled, And not every pause is a rejection. Some silences are simply the sound of life moving forward without needing you in every moment. That morning began like the others, calm, soft, ordinary. I woke up, offered my prayers, and walked slowly into the living room instead of the kitchen. The sunlight rested gently on the curtains, and the house carried a peaceful stillness. Usually, by that time, I would already be preparing breakfast. But now, I sat down with my tea and let the day begin without rushing to define my role in it. A few minutes later, I heard Sana in the kitchen. The sound of utensils, the soft hum of the stove, the quiet rhythm of someone comfortably managing her own home. Once upon a time, that sound would have made me stand up immediately, not because she asked, but because I believed helping before being asked was love. That day, I stayed seated. Not out of pride, not out of hurt, but out of awareness. Saad joined her shortly after. "Did you add less salt today?" he asked lightly. Sana laughed. "You always say that." Their conversation flowed easily, naturally, without needing my presence as a bridge between them. And something inside me shifted again. Not painfully, peacefully. I realized they were not excluding me. They were simply complete in their own rhythm. And for the first time, instead of stepping in to maintain the family dynamic, I allowed the dynamic to exist without my constant emotional management. When breakfast was ready, Sana called softly, "Mom, breakfast is ready." Not, "Mom, can you check this?" "Mom, what should we make?" "Mom, did you cook?" Just a simple invitation. I walked to the dining table and sat with them. We ate together. No tension and awkwardness. Just a quiet, respectful meal. But I noticed something new. Earlier, I used to lead every conversation, asking about work, health, plans, and small daily matters. This time I did not. I let the silence stay. At first, it felt unfamiliar. Then it felt honest. Saad spoke to Sana about a meeting. Sana discussed groceries. They exchanged small thoughts that belonged naturally to their life as husband and wife. And I listened without trying to guide the atmosphere. That was new for me. Very new. After breakfast, Saad stood up and said, "Mom, I might be late today." Normally, I would respond with reminders, eat on time, don't skip lunch, drive carefully. This time, I simply smiled. "Okay, son." He paused for a second, almost expecting more. Then he nodded and left. Such a small interaction. But it showed me how much of my identity had been built around constant emotional caretaking. Later in the afternoon, I found Sana arranging the living room cushions and adjusting the decor. She moved things slightly, making the space look more modern, more aligned with her taste. Months ago, I might have corrected her. Not harshly, just gently. "This cushion looks better there." That decoration has always stayed on the side. But now, I watched quietly from the hallway, because I asked myself a simple question. Was this about right and wrong, or about control? The answer humbled me. It was never about the cushions. It was about my attachment to being the one who decided everything in the house. And slowly, gracefully, I was learning to let go of that invisible authority. In the evening, something unexpected happened. The electricity went out. The house fell into sudden silence and dimness, lit only by the fading sunlight from the windows. Instinctively, my body almost reacted. I used to immediately find candles, check the fuse, organize everything. But before I could move, I heard Saad say, "I'll get the backup lights." And Sana replied, "I'll bring candles just in case." Within minutes, the living room was softly lit again.
Calm.
Managed. Functional. I stood there watching them, not with sadness, but with realization. They were capable, fully capable, and perhaps they always had been. I had just filled every silence so quickly that they never needed to step into those spaces themselves. That night, we sat together in the candlelight. A rare, quiet moment. Sana smiled softly. "It feels peaceful like this." "Yes," I replied gently. "It does." There was a pause after that. Not heavy, not uncomfortable, just present. And for the first time in years, I did not rush to fill it with unnecessary words. Because I was beginning to understand a deeper truth. When you stop filling every silence, you start hearing your own heart more clearly. Later, in my room, I opened an old drawer and found Saad's childhood drawings. Stick figures, crooked houses, small handwritten notes that said, "I love you, Mom." My fingers trembled slightly as I held them. Back then, he needed me for everything. Emotionally, physically, practically. And I had shaped my entire identity around that need. But children grow. Sons become husbands. Homes evolve. Roles shift. And love changes form. It doesn't disappear. It matures. That night, when they called me for dinner, I joined them calmly. Sanaa had cooked my favorite dish. "I remembered you like this," she said warmly. That sentence touched me more than constant dependence ever had. Because it showed something important. I was not being replaced, that I was being respected in a different way. During dinner, Saad suddenly said, "Mom, the house feels quieter these days." I looked at him with a gentle expression. "Does it feel empty?" I asked. He shook his head slowly. "No, just calmer."
Calmer.
Not distant, not cold, not disconnected. Just calmer. And that word confirmed what I had been sensing all along. My constant involvement had once been necessary. Now, my calm presence was enough. After dinner, they went to the living room while I returned to my room earlier than usual. Not because I was unwelcome, but because I no longer felt the need to occupy every shared space to prove my presence in the family. Sitting by the window, I reflected deeply. For years, I had filled every silence with service, every gap with effort, every pause with involvement. And slowly, without realizing it, I had made myself emotionally indispensable, not because they demanded it, but because I believed that was my role. Now, by stepping back, I was seeing the truth. Love does not decrease when effort decreases. Only the noise around love changes. In fact, something unexpected was happening. They were becoming more mindful, more respectful, more attentive in small, genuine ways. Not out of obligation, but out of natural balance. Before sleeping, I whispered a quiet thought to myself. I am not less important because I am less involved. That sentence settled into my heart like peace. Because the real fear was never silence. The real fear was losing my place. But now I understood something deeply comforting. My place in this family was never meant to be secured by constant doing. It was secured by love, history, and quiet presence. And those things do not disappear just because I stopped filling every silence. That night, as the house rested in complete calm, I realized the third step of my journey had quietly unfolded. I had stopped rushing to be needed, stopped correcting every small change, stopped managing every emotional space. And in doing so, I discovered a strength I never knew I had. The strength to exist with dignity, even in the quiet spaces where I was no longer the center. Because sometimes, self-respect does not speak loudly. It simply sits peacefully in the silences we no longer feel the need to fill. There is a very quiet kind of realization that does not arrive with pain. It arrives with clarity. And clarity, I learned, can be more life-changing than heartbreak. By the fourth week of my silent distance, the house had fully adjusted to a new rhythm, one where I was present, respected, included, but no longer central to every decision. At first, that shift had felt unfamiliar. Now it was beginning to feel natural, not because I mattered less, but because I had finally stopped measuring my worth by how often I was needed. That morning began with soft rain tapping against the windows. The sky was gray, and the house carried a gentle calm that matched the weather outside. I was sitting in the living room, folding a small stack of freshly washed clothes. Slowly, peacefully, without rushing to finish before anyone asked for something. From the kitchen, I heard Sanaa's voice. "Saad, should we order groceries online this time?" Saad replied casually, "Yes, just get what we usually need." Usually. That word stayed with me. For years, I had been the one who knew what the house usually needed. The pantry lists, the monthly planning, the small details that kept everything running smoothly. I did not interrupt. I did not walk into the kitchen to offer suggestions. I simply continued folding the clothes. A few minutes later, Sana came into the living room with her phone. "Mom," she said politely, "do you need anything from the grocery order?" "Not." "What should we order?" "Not." "Can you make the list?" "Just." "Do you need anything?"
Such a small change.
Such a powerful realization. I looked at her and smiled gently. "No, son. Whatever you both get is fine." She nodded and went back to the kitchen. And in that moment, I felt something very subtle inside my heart. Not hurt, not rejection, just the quiet understanding that I was no longer the first reference point for household decisions. And strangely, it did not break me, because I had already prepared my heart for this transition. Later that afternoon, Saad returned from work earlier than usual. He walked into the house, loosened his tie, and immediately called out, "Sana, can you bring me some tea?" Years ago, that call would have been, "Mom, can I have tea?" The change was natural, expected,
Healthy.
and yet, hearing it out loud felt like witnessing a chapter gently closing. Sana brought the tea quickly and sat beside him. They began discussing something about finances, planning, and future expenses. I was in the same room, but I was not part of the conversation. Not intentionally excluded. Simply not required. For a brief second, an old instinct rose inside me. The urge to ask, to guide, to offer advice, to step into the discussion as I always had. After all, I had managed this household for years. I understood budgeting, planning, and long-term decisions. But I stayed silent. Not because my opinion had no value, but because I finally understood something important. Being wise also means knowing when your involvement is truly needed and when it is simply habitual. Their discussion ended smoothly without my input, and the house remained peaceful. That peace told me more than words ever could. In the evening, something happened that quietly changed me even more. Sana wasn't feeling well. She sat on the sofa, slightly tired, holding her head. Saad immediately noticed. "You should rest," he said gently. "I'll handle dinner." I watched him walk into the kitchen, a place where, for years, he rarely entered unless I asked him to bring something. He moved slowly, unsure but willing. He opened cabinets, checked ingredients, even searched for spices in the new arrangement Sana had made weeks ago. He struggled a little, but he did not call me. Not once. And I did not step in. I sat quietly, observing a moment that felt both emotional and beautiful. My son was learning care in a new way, not as a child relying on his mother, but as a husband supporting his wife. That realization softened my heart deeply. After some time, he brought simple food to Sana and sat beside her while she ate. "Is it okay?" he asked. She smiled faintly. "It's good." They shared a quiet, caring moment, one that did not require my involvement to exist. And for the first time, I did not feel replaced watching it. I felt relieved. Relieved that he had grown into someone capable of giving the same care he once only received. Later that night, Saad finally turned toward me. "Mom, you didn't come to the kitchen today," he said gently. His tone was curious, not accusing. I looked at him calmly. "You are handling it well?" I replied. He paused, then smiled slightly. "Still, you used to manage everything." "Used to." Another quiet confirmation of change. "Yes," I said softly. "And now you both can." There was a short silence after that. Not awkward, not heavy, just thoughtful. He nodded slowly, as if understanding something he hadn't noticed before. That night, after they went to their room, I walked through the house alone. The kitchen was slightly messy. The living room cushions were arranged differently. The dining table had small signs of use. Earlier, I would have fixed everything immediately before sleeping. Perfect order used to be my silent language of care. But that night, I left things as they were. Not out of neglect, but out of acceptance. Because I finally understood a deep truth. A home does not lose warmth when control is shared, it gains balance. Sitting on my bed, I reflected on the most important realization of that day. I was no longer the first choice for every need. And instead of feeling invisible, I felt lighter. Because being the first choice for everything comes with an invisible burden, the burden of constant responsibility, constant availability, and constant emotional labor. And for years, I had carried that burden with love. But now life was gently redistributing it. Not as disrespect, not as rejection, but as natural progression. Before turning off the light, I remembered something from Saad's childhood. Whenever he learned to do something on his own, tying his shoes, packing his bag, solving a problem, I used to feel proud. Not useless.
Proud.
So, why should adulthood be any different? Why should his independence as a husband make me feel displaced, when his independence as a child once made me feel fulfilled? That question brought unexpected peace to my heart. Because the truth was simple. I was not being replaced. I was being released from a role that no longer needed to be carried alone. And that release, though quiet, was dignified. As the rain continued outside and the house fell into complete silence, I whispered a thought that felt heavier than any realization before it. I am still loved, even when I am not the first choice. And for the first time since this journey began, that truth did not hurt. It healed. Because I finally understood that self-respect is not about demanding importance. It is about accepting change with grace. And that night marked another silent milestone in my journey. Not the day I was ignored, not the day I was disrespected, but the day I calmly accepted that my role had evolved. From being the center of every decision to being the steady presence in the background. And surprisingly, that background was not empty. It was peaceful. There was no final argument, no confrontation, and dramatic moment where words were spoken and tears were demanded. If someone had watched our home from the outside, they would have said nothing had changed at all. And in many ways, they would have been right. The house was still full, meals were still shared, respect was still present, love was still there, quiet, steady, unchanged in its essence. But inside me, something had completed its journey. Not a breaking, not a withdrawal, not a transformation. It began on an ordinary evening. Sanaa and Saad were in the living room, discussing plans for the future, small things at first, then larger ones. Finances, travel, possible changes in their routine. Their voices were calm, thoughtful, aligned in a way that only two people building a life together can be. I was sitting nearby with my knitting, not excluded, not ignored, simply present. And for the first time, I noticed something deeply important. They were not lowering their voices because I was there. They were not adjusting their decisions around me. They were not waiting for my approval. Not out of disrespect, but out of natural independence. And instead of feeling left out, I felt peaceful. Because I finally understood what my heart had been learning for weeks. A mother's place is not meant to remain at the center forever. IT is meant to gently move to the side, without losing its depth. Sanaa looked at me suddenly and smiled. Mom, we're thinking of rearranging the guest room into a small workspace. Her tone was soft, considerate, respectful, not asking permission, but informing with care. I placed my knitting down and smiled gently. That sounds like a good idea. And I meant it. There was no hidden ache in my voice, and silent resistance, and emotional heaviness behind the words. Just acceptance. Because the truth was clear now. This was no longer just my house in the way it once had been. It was their home too. Later that night, I walked into the kitchen and noticed Sanaa had already prepared everything for the next morning. Ingredients set aside, containers labeled, small details handled without needing my involvement. Months ago, this sight might have made me feel unnecessary. Now, it made me feel relieved. Relieved that the home would continue smoothly even without my constant effort. Relieved that my years of care had not created dependence, but stability. I poured myself a glass of water and stood quietly for a moment. The kitchen lights reflected softly on the counter, a space where I had spent countless years cooking, planning, organizing, managing every detail with silent dedication. And suddenly, a memory returned. a much younger Saad, standing on a stool beside me, asking, "Mom, will you always do everything for me?" Back then, I laughed and said, "As long as you need me, son." I had not realized then that one day he would no longer need me in the same way. And that day had finally arrived. Not abruptly, not painfully, but gently. The next morning, something unexpected happened. Saad knocked softly on my door. "Mom, are you awake?" "Yes, son," I replied. He entered and sat at the edge of the chair near my bed, quieter than usual. "I wanted to ask something," he said slowly. I looked at him calmly. "Of course." He hesitated before speaking, as if choosing his words carefully. "You've been different these past few weeks." Not distant, not cold, just different. I smiled softly. "In what way?" He exhaled slightly. "You don't rush to do everything anymore. You don't interrupt our conversations. You don't remind me about small things like before." There was no accusation in his voice. Only observation. Only curiosity. "I'm still here," I said gently. "I know," he replied quickly. "That's the thing. You're here, but quieter." His words were honest. And honesty, when spoken with love, does not hurt. It clarifies. "I'm learning a new role," I said softly. He frowned slightly. "What role?" I paused, choosing words that carried truth without burden. "The role of a mother whose son has built his own life." The room fell silent. Not heavy silence, reflective silence. "I never wanted you to feel like you had to step back," he said after a moment. "And you never made me feel that way," I replied calmly. That was the truth. No harsh words had pushed me away, and disrespect had forced my distance. It had been a choice. A conscious, dignified choice. Sanaa later joined us with tea and sat beside Saad. Her eyes held quiet concern. "Mom, have we done something wrong?" That question reached my heart deeply. Not because it was filled with guilt, but because it was filled with care. I shook my head gently. "No, son. You have done nothing wrong." "Then why do you stay so quiet now?" she asked softly. I looked at both of them, the son I raised and the woman who now shared his life, and for the first time, I spoke the full truth of my journey. "I did not choose distance because I felt disrespected," I said slowly. "I chose distance because I respect both of you and myself." They listened without interrupting. "For years," I continued, "my life revolved around being needed. Every meal, every reminder, every decision. And that was my joy, my purpose." My voice remained steady, not emotional, not dramatic. But life changes. Children grow, homes evolve, and love takes new shapes. Sanaa's eyes softened. "I noticed that you both were managing everything well, naturally, peacefully, without needing me to fill every space," I added gently. Saad looked down for a moment. And instead of waiting for the day when my constant involvement might feel like interference, I said quietly, I stepped back with dignity. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of understanding. Tears did not fall, voices did not rise. Because this was not a moment of conflict. It was a moment of emotional clarity. I was never unloved, I continued softly. I was simply transitioning from being central to being present. Sanaa reached for my hand slowly. "We still need you, Mom." I smiled, a deep, peaceful smile. "Needing and loving are not the same thing," I replied gently, "and I am grateful that you love me without needing me for everything." That sentence seemed to settle something in the room. Something unspoken. Something important. That evening, the house felt warmer in a different way. Not louder, not more dependent, just more aware. Saad began sitting with me more often, not out of obligation, but out of genuine choice. Sanaa involved me in conversations naturally, not formally. But the most important change was inside me. I no longer watched moments to measure my importance, I no longer filled silences to secure my place, I no longer rushed to prove my value through constant effort. One night, as I prepared to sleep, I walked through the house one last time, not as a caretaker checking responsibilities, but as a mother observing the life she had helped build. The living room was softly lit. The kitchen was neatly arranged by Sana. Saad's laughter echoed faintly from their room. And instead of feeling replaced, I felt fulfilled. Because I realized something profound. My absence from small tasks had not reduced my presence in their hearts. In fact, it had refined it. Before turning off the lights, Saad called out softly, "Good night, Mom." "Good night, son," I replied. And in that simple exchange, there was no distance, only quiet love. As I lay in bed, I reflected on the journey that had begun with a silent realization and ended with peaceful acceptance. I had not left the family, that I had not withdrawn love, that I had not created emotional walls. I had simply chosen distance over silent self-erasure. Distance that preserved dignity, distance that allowed growth, distance that protected love from turning into quiet exhaustion. And in doing so, I discovered something deeply healing. Self-respect does not reduce love. It purifies it. That night, with a heart lighter than it had been in years, I whispered the final truth to myself. I did not step back because I was unwanted. I stepped back because love deserves space to grow naturally. The house was quiet, but the silence no longer questioned my place. It affirmed it. I was still the mother, still respected, still loved, just no longer disappearing to remain needed. And that was not an ending of my role. It was the most graceful evolution of it. Because in choosing distance instead of waiting for disrespect, I did not lose my family. I preserved my peace, protected my dignity, and kept my love intact, steady, quiet, and unshaken. And in the end, that quiet decision did not create separation. It created balance. A balance where love remained, respect deepened, and my presence, though softer, became more meaningful than ever before.